The hum was my symphony. Not the sterile, oppressive silence of most corporate headquarters, but the vibrant, electric thrum of creation. It was the sound of 1,000 servers breathing in unison, of cooling fans whispering secrets to the raised floor, of the very air vibrating with untapped potential. This was the heart of Innovate Inc., the server farm that housed my life's work. And I, Aurelia Vance, was its architect and conductor. From the glass-walled observation deck, my office, I could watch the blinking green and blue lights dance, a silent ballet of data that I had choreographed. For 5 years, this view had been my sunrise and my sunset, my creation. Our creation was named Nexus. It was more than a product. It was a revolution packaged in a sleek, intuitive interface. An AI-driven organizational platform so advanced it didn't just manage your workflow, it anticipated it. It learned, adapted, and integrated every facet of a business, from logistics and finance to HR and creative brainstorming. It was designed to be a seamless extension of the human mind, a digital nervous system for any company it powered. And it was mine. The concept, the core architecture, the 1,000-page design document that felt like a holy textet all sprang from a relentless obsession to build something that mattered. Innovate Inc. was built on a glitched but, for a time, genuine Silicon Valley dream. 3 of us in a glorified garage. Julian Croft, the charismatic visionary with a silver tongue and a Rolodex that bled gold. A rotating cast of brilliant but fleeting coders. And me, the quiet, intense builder who translated Julian's grand pronouncements into tangible, functional code. We were a perfect trinity of hustle, vision, and execution. Julian could sell a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves, and I could build the advanced refrigeration unit to keep it from dripping. As we grew, so did our family. The most significant addition was Kenji Tanaka. Scudmayo arrived fresh from Stanford. A prodigy with fingers that danced across a keyboard like a concert pianist. He was hungry, brilliant, and saw me as something of a legend. I took him under my wing, mentored him, and shared everything I knew. We spent countless nights fueled by lukewarm pizza and a shared passion for elegant code, refining Nexus, pushing its boundaries. He was the son I never had, the brilliant student who would one day surpass the master. I trusted him implicitly, not just with my code, but with my dream. It's not just a platform, like Julian would say, his hands sweeping across the skyline. Visible from his corner office, a floor above mine. It's a legacy, our legacy. His ambition was a force of nature, an intoxicating storm that swept everyone up in its path. He had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the world, that your ideas were the most brilliant he'd ever heard. He was my mentor, my partner, my staunchest defender in boardroom brawls over funding and timelines. He shielded me from the corporate vultures, allowing me the creative freedom to build my masterpiece. Or so I believed. The final weeks before the global launch of Nexus were a blur of frantic energy. We were the darlings of the tech world. TechCrunch and Wired had already dubbed Nexus the API of the gods. The next trillion-dollar idea, the IPO, was slated for the quarter after launch. And the numbers being thrown around were staggering. The kind of figures that turn people into deities or monsters. For me, it was never about the money. It was about the creation. Seeing my vision come to life on a global scale was the only validation I needed. There was one point of contention, one argument that had become a recurring dissonant note in our symphony of progress, a developer backdoor. It was Kenji who first proposed it, a hidden, privileged access point that would allow for emergency patches and updates without going through standard security protocols. Think of it as a master key Aurelia, he'd argued during a late night session, his eyes glowing with youthful zeal. If a client has a catastrophic failure, we can go in, fix it directly, and be heroes. It's a fail-safe. A fail-safe is a vulnerability in disguise, I countered, my fingers steepled. It bypasses the very security architecture I've spent 2 years perfecting. It's a single point of failure, a target. The entire system is built on trust and encryption. Backdoor shatters that trust. It's a betrayal of the user. The argument went on for weeks. I was uncharacteristically stubborn, my gut screaming at me that this was a mistake. I saw it as a corruption of Nexus's core philosophy. Julian, usually my ally, sided with Kenji. I see the practical application. Laya, he said, using his placating, reasonable tone. It's a business decision. Speed of service is everything. Let's just keep it undocumented, known only, to the three of us, an ace up our sleeve. I felt a pang of something. Betrayal felt too strong a word then. It was more like a subtle crack in the foundation of my faith in him. But I was exhausted, outnumbered, and the pressure of the launch was immense. Against my better judgment, against every instinct that had made me who I was, I relented. I wrote the specifications for the back door, but I made Kenji code it. I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt like deliberately engineering a flaw into my own child. It was a concession I would come to regret with every fiber of my being. The launch party was scheduled for a Friday night. It was to be a lavish affair at a chic San Francisco art gallery, a celebration of our impending triumph. The final launch sequence was automated, set to go live globally at midnight Pacific time. That Friday morning, I walked into my office. The hum of the servers, a familiar comfort, a mug of black coffee in my hand. My screen was locked. Unusual. I never locked it at the office. I entered my password. Access denied. I tried again, my fingers suddenly cold. Access denied. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. I tried to access the core Nexus server through my admin terminal. User permissions revoked. My breath hitched. This wasn't a glitch. This was a surgical excision. My name, my digital ghost, was being systematically erased from the machine I had built. My phone rang. It was Julian's assistant, her voice. Strained and artificially polite. Aurelia, Mr. Croft needs to see you in the main boardroom immediately. The walk to the boardroom was the longest of my life. The usual buzz of the office seemed to fade into a dull roar. People averted. Their eyes, whispers followed me like ghosts. I saw Kenji standing near the water cooler, his back to me. He didn't turn around. The boardroom was a sterile glass and steel monstrosity designed for executions. Julian wasn't alone. Seated at the long, polished table were two grim-faced men in suits. I didn't recognize lawyers by the predatory stillness in their eyes and Innovate Inc. As head of HR, a woman whose smile had never once reached her eyes. Julian stood by the window, his back to me, looking out at the city. He looked every bit the powerful CEO, his custom-tailored suit, a suit of armor. Julian, what the hell is going on? I demanded, my voice shaking slightly. I'm locked, out of the system. He turned slowly, and the warmth I had known for years was gone. His eyes were chips of ice. In its place was a look of profound theatrical disappointment. It was a performance, and a chillingly good one. Aurelia, he began, his voice dripping with faux regret. We've uncovered something. Something. I still can't quite wrap my head around. One of the lawyers slid a tablet across the table. On the screen were spreadsheets, email chains, data transfer logs. My name was on everything. It was a meticulously crafted digital trail that showed me, clear as day, siphoning Nexus's source code and selling it to our biggest competitor, a corporate behemoth named Cygnus Systems. The emails were written in my style, the data packets, routed through a series of offshore servers before landing in a folder labeled with my initials on a Cygnus-owned cloud drive. It was a masterpiece of fabrication. It was impossible, and yet it was undeniable. I don't understand, I stammered, my mind racing, trying to find a foothold in the crumbling reality. This is insane. This isn't real. It's fake. The data logs don't lie, Aurelia, Julian said, his voice hard. The IP addresses, the encryption keys. They all point back to you. We even traced the payments, a numbered account in the Cayman Islands. $500,000 has already been deposited, my world tilted on its axis. I felt dizzy, nauseous. I looked at the evidence again, and a horrible, sickening realization dawned on me. The method of data transfer, the way the code was packaged, it used a protocol that bypassed our primary firewalls. It used the exact architecture of the back door, the one I had designed and Kenji had built. My gaze snapped back to Julian. "The back door?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "You used the back door to frame me." A flicker of something surprise, fear, crossed his face, before being replaced by a mask of cold fury. "You're delusional? First, you betray the company, and now you invent conspiracy theories. I stood by you, Aurelia. I championed you. And this is how you repay me." The performance was for them, for the lawyers and HR. The betrayal was for me, with twisting the knife, making sure I understood the depth of his treachery. The head of HR slid a thick folder in front of me. K. Termination Agreement. It cited gross misconduct and corporate espionage. K. It came with an ironclad non-disclosure agreement and a non-compete clause that would effectively blacklist me from the entire tech industry for a decade. "If you sign this now," the lawyer said, his voice a dry rasp, "and walk away quietly, Mr. Croft is generously willing to forego criminal charges. We will simply state that you have left to pursue other opportunities. If you refuse, we will hand this entire file over to the U.S. Attorney's Office this afternoon. Considering the evidence, you'll be in a federal prison by Monday." It was a checkmate. They had me. My creation, my reputation, my entire life's work, stolen and twisted into a weapon against me. They had used my own intellect, my own design, to build my cage, and the final, cruelest twist. My signature on that document was the only thing protecting me from a prison sentence for a crime I didn't commit. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. The ink felt like poison as I signed my name. I looked past the lawyers, past HR, and met Julian's gaze. There was no remorse, no flicker of the man I thought I knew. There was only the cold, triumphant glint of a predator who had successfully devoured his rival. He had taken my dream, my legacy, and was now standing on my professional corpse too. Declare it his own. I was escorted out of the building by security, not even allowed to go back to my office. My personal effects would be boxed up and sent to me. As I stood on the curb, the familiar San Francisco fog rolling in, the celebratory launch party posters seemed to mock me. "The future is Nexus," they proclaimed. My future felt like a barren wasteland. The news broke an hour later. A syndicated tech report, clearly fed by Innovate Inc., SPR department. Aurelia Vance, lead architect of Nexus, abruptly departs company amidst launch. The article was a masterclass in corporate assassination, filled with veiled implications and anonymous sources questioning my stability and erratic behavior in the final months. They were not just firing me. They were erasing me from the narrative, painting me as a volatile, unreliable woman who couldn't handle the pressure. Julian, of course, was quoted extensively, expressing his sadness and disappointment, but assuring investors that the project was bigger than any one person, and that the team, now led by the brilliant Kenji Tanaka, was stronger than ever. That night, I didn't go to the launch party. I sat in my darkened apartment, watching the live stream on my laptop. I saw Julian take the stage to thunderous applause. He was radiant, a king addressing his adoring subjects. He spoke of vision, of dedication, of the long and arduous journey. To this moment, he never mentioned my name. 'Twas as if I had never existed. And then he brought Kenji on stage, my protégé, my student. Kenji, who looked overwhelmed but also undeniably proud, stood beside the man who had orchestrated my ruin. They held up their hands together in victory as the clock struck midnight and Nexus officially went live across the world. The hum of the servers, my symphony, now played for them. I closed the laptop. The silence in my apartment was absolute. I felt hollowed out, a ghost in my own life. They had taken everything: my passion, my reputation, my future. They had used my own trust as a weapon, and my creation as the means of my execution. They thought they had one. They thought I was broken, silenced by NDAs and the threat of prison. In that moment, sitting in the suffocating darkness, they were right. I was broken. But as the hours crept by, as the initial shock gave way to a cold, simmering rage, a single thought began to cut through the despair. A thought as sharp and clear as a shard of glass. They had been thorough. They had been meticulous. But they had made one critical mistake. They had framed me using the back door, a secret entrance known only to the three of us. They had locked me out of the front door, revoked my credentials, and thrown me into the street. But they had forgotten something. I designed the house. I knew where every secret passage was, every hidden crawl space, every structural weakness. And in their haste to seize the throne, they forgot that the architect of the system, also the architect of its flaws, the back door they had used to destroy me, was still there. And while they had the keys to the kingdom, had the master blueprint, a new feeling began to bloom in the desolate wasteland of my heart. It wasn't hope. It was something colder, harder, more patient. It was the icy resolve of a woman who had lost everything and therefore had nothing left to lose. They thought the story was over. They thought they had written the final chapter. But as I sat there in the ruins of my life, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. My beginning and their end. Hum was no longer my symphony of creation. It was now a countdown. And I, the ghost they had created, was about to haunt the machine. The first week was a study in free fall. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my sterile, minimalist apartment, a space I'd designed for efficiency, not comfort, and now it felt like a prison cell. The silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was a crushing physical presence, a stark contrast to the constant creative hum that had been the soundtrack of my life. Sleep was a stranger, and when it did visit, it brought nightmares, painted in the icy hues of Julian's eyes and the averted gaze of Kenji. The media storm raged on without me, so it was a trending topic for about 72 hours, a cautionary tale whispered in the Slack channels of 1,000 tech companies. Then, as it always does, the world moved on. Nexus was a resounding success. Innovate Inc. pre-IPO valuation skyrocketed. Julian Croft was on the cover of Forbes, hailed as the maestro of modern tech. Kenji Tanaka was his brilliant, loyal protégé, the new face of development. My name was a footnote, then an erasure. I spent days doing nothing but staring at the termination agreement. The words swam before my eyes, each clause a bar in my cage. The NDA was a muzzle, the non-compete a pair of shackles. They had anticipated every move a wronged employee might make. A lawsuit was impossible. The fabricated evidence was too perfect. And they had my signature acknowledging my departure. Going to the press was equally futile. I was the unstable woman who'd buckled under pressure, a narrative they had expertly preceded. Any public accusation I made would be framed as the bitter rantings of a disgruntled ex-employee. Further cementing their fiction, it was during a particularly bleak afternoon, watching the rain streak down my floor-to-ceiling windows, that the rage finally burned through the fog of despair. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger, but a cold, dense singularity of fury forming in my core. They had built my prison, but they had used my tools. The thought that had been a flicker was now a steady, burning flame. The back door. My personal laptop, a high-end machine I used for side projects and personal research, was clean. It had never been networked with Innovate Inc.'s internal systems. They wouldn't have thought to touch it. It was my only link back to the world I'd been cast out of. I spent 2 days in a focused trance, not eating, barely sleeping. Turned my spare bedroom into a war room. I wiped the machine's primary drive and installed a fresh, untraceable operating system. I routed my internet connection through a cascading series of VPNs and proxy servers, bouncing my digital signature across half a dozen countries until it was as ephemeral as smoke. I became a ghost. Finding the back door from the outside was the first test. It was designed to be invisible, accessible only through a specific port and a complex, multi-layered authentication sequence. It was a digital needle in a global haystack. But I knew the needle's composition. I knew the specific frequency at which it vibrated. I had written the damn specification. After 36 hours of relentless probing, I found it. A flicker of a response from a server in Innovate's main cloud cluster. It's a digital whisper in the dark. Time here. A tremor of triumph. The first positive emotion I had felt in weeks shot through me. My fingers flew across the keyboard, inputting the first layer of the authentication key. It was a sequence based on the Fibonacci series, something Kenji and I had once geeked out over. Access granted. The second layer was a hexadecimal string derived from the publication date of Alan Turing's paper on computing machinery. Access granted. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it, the final layer. The master key, Julian, in his arrogance, had insisted the final key be something only he would know, for ultimate security. He had chosen his birthday, a 6-digit string. 'Twas laughably insecure, a testament to his monumental ego. I typed it in, my breath held tight in my chest. Access denied. I froze. My mind raced. Had they changed it? Of course they would have changed it. They weren't complete fools. They had locked me out, so they would have reset the one key they thought I might know. I tried Kenji's birthday. Access denied. I tried the company's founding date. Access denied. Frustration, sharp and bitter, rose in my throat. I was so close. I leaned back, closing my eyes, forcing myself to think, to deconstruct the psychology. Julian was arrogant, but he was also theatrical. Kenji was brilliant, but followed Julian's lead. They wouldn't have chosen something random. It would be something meaningful to them, something that solidified their new partnership, their victory. What was the most significant date to them now? The date of their triumph. The date they had destroyed me. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed in the date of my termination. Month, day, year, authentication. Successful. Welcome, privileged user. The screen resolved into a raw command line interface. No sleek GUI, just blinking green text on a black background. But it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I was inside Nexus, not as Aurelia Vance, the architect, but as an anonymous, omnipotent god. The ghost in the machine, my first instinct was to burn it all down, to unleash a virus that would wipe the servers clean, turn their billion-dollar asset into digital dust. It would be satisfying, a raw, primal scream of vengeance. But it would be fleeting. They were insured. They had backups. They would likely pin the catastrophic failure on me anyway. The disgruntled employee taking her revenge. No, that wasn't enough. Destruction was artless. I didn't want to just destroy their creation. I wanted to dismantle their reality. I wanted them to feel the same creeping dread, the same loss of control, the same public humiliation they had inflicted upon me. My revenge would not be a bomb. It would be a cancer, growing slowly from within, corrupting everything they touched, until the entire edifice collapsed under the weight of its own rot. For the next few weeks, I was a silent observer. I did nothing but watch. I had access to everything. I saw the real, unfiltered data streams, the internal emails, the Slack channels, the financial reports. I saw Julian and Kenji celebrating their victory. I read their self-congratulatory emails, their plans for the IPO, their casual dismissal of my memory. Kenji had been given my office, my title, my team. He was living my life. The bitterness was a physical taste in my mouth, but I channeled it into focus. I needed to understand the new rhythm of the company, the power dynamics, the individual vanities and insecurities of the key players. I was a hunter studying my prey. My first move was designed to be small, untraceable, and psychologically unnerving. A test of my control. Julian was scheduled to give a major keynote address at a tech summit in Austin. It was a live-streamed event, a victory lap to showcase Nexus's power. He was using a presentation integrated directly into the Nexus platform, a feature I had designed to showcase seamless data integration. 10 minutes into his speech, as he was showing off the platform's real-time analytics, I made my move. From my darkened room thousands of miles away, I sent a single, simple command. It wasn't a hack. It was a privileged instruction, the kind, a thing a developer might use for debugging. I targeted the presentation module. As Julian boasted about Nexus's flawless financial projections, the numbers on the massive screen behind him began to subtly change. The decimal point shifted here. A revenue projection dropped by a few million there. Then I targeted the integrated visual assets. The sleek Innovate Inc. logo at the corner of the screen, momentarily replaced by the logo of a failed 1990s dot-com bubble company. It's a private joke between me and Julian from years ago. It's flashed for less than a second, so quickly that people would dismiss it as a visual glitch, a trick of the light on the live stream. I saw the flicker of confusion on Julian's face. He faltered for a beat, his smooth, practiced cadence stuttering. He glanced at the screen, saw the corrected numbers. I had already reversed the change and tried to play it off as a momentary lapse, but the seed of doubt was planted. In the VIP Slack channel, which I was monitoring, I saw Kenji frantically messaging the on-site tech team. What was that? Did anyone see that glitch? Check the presentation module logs. Now, of course, they would find nothing. The command was executed from a privileged level that didn't write to the standard logs. It was a whisper from a ghost. The second act was for Kenji. He was leading a crucial technical deep dive for a potential enterprise client, a massive German automotive company. The deal was worth hundreds of millions. Kenji, eager to prove himself, was demonstrating Nexus's robust security features. As he initiated a simulated external attack to show how the firewalls would repel it, I gently intervened. I didn't block the firewall, I did something far more insidious. I rerouted the system's language settings. Suddenly, every line of code, every diagnostic report, every security alert on his demonstration screen flipped from English to Cyrillic. Kenji froze. His face projected onto the conference room screen went pale. He began to stammer, clicking furiously, trying to reverse the change. The German executives looked on, their expressions shifting from impressed to concerned. For a full, excruciating minute, Kenji was utterly helpless, wrestling with a system that was inexplicably speaking a language he didn't understand. Finally, I let him have control back. The screen flipped back to English. He managed to laugh it off, blaming a localization bug in a beta feature. But the damage was done. The client's post-meeting notes, which I read later that night, mentioned concerns about platform stability. The seed of incompetence was sown. These were pinpricks, psychological games. But I needed more than just access. I needed intelligence. From inside the building, a human element. My ghost in the machine needed a physical confederate. I thought back to the people I had worked with, the ones who had been pushed aside by Julian's relentless ambition. My mind settled on Sarah Jenkins. Sarah had been our head of quality assurance. A meticulous, no-nonsense woman who was brilliant at her job. She was the one who would find the single flaw in a million lines of code. She had clashed with Julian, frequently arguing for longer testing cycles and more rigorous standards, which Julian saw as obstacles to his aggressive timelines. A few months before my ousting, he had unceremoniously restructured her department, effectively demoting her and putting one of his yes-men in her place. She was still there, sidelined and simmering with resentment. She had sent me a brief one-line email after my departure. "They're fools. I'm sorry. Contacting her was risky. I couldn't use my name. I needed a new identity. I created a secure encrypted email address under the pseudonym Cassandra. In mythology, Sandra was a prophetess, cursed by the gods to tell the truth but never be believed. It felt fitting my first email to her personal non-work account was short and cryptic. Subject: a shared disdain for false prophets. Miss Jenkins, I believe we have a common interest in seeing true innovation valued over charismatic rhetoric. Have a reputation for seeing the flaws others miss. I have a unique perspective on the current flaws at Innovate Inc. Perhaps we can help each other ensure a higher standard of quality." Cassandra didn't expect an immediate reply. I expected skepticism, fear, or for her to simply delete it. Sarah was a pragmatist. 3 days later, a reply came. "Who is this?" My response was just as brief. "A ghost in the machine." I then sent her a single line of coda snippet from the Nexus core that only a handful of people would recognize. It was a piece of my original work, an elegant algorithm I was particularly proud of, one that Sarah had once praised for its efficiency. Her reply came within minutes. "Aurelia, is that you? What is this?" I knew I had her. "That name no longer belongs to me. I am Cassandra. I was wronged by the same man who wronged you. I am in a position to correct the narrative. But I need eyes and ears on the ground. I will never ask you to do anything that will directly implicate you. I just need information. In return, I will provide you with the satisfaction of seeing a house of cards tumble." The digital conversation that followed was tense, but I could feel her resolve hardening. I explained nothing of how I had access. I only demonstrated its power. I told her to check the server logs for Julian's Austin presentation at a specific timestamp. She would find nothing, but she would know I was telling the truth about the glitch. I told her about the localization bug in Kenji's demo. Sarah, more than anyone, would know that such a bug was impossible in that context. Her final email of the night was the one I was waiting for. "What do you need?" My ghost now had a body, a whisper on the inside to complement my omnipotence from the outside. The first phase of my revenge was complete. I had established my power, tested my control, and recruited my first soldier. Julian and Kenji were celebrating their success, completely unaware that their greatest achievement, the Nexus platform itself, was slowly being turned against them. They were living in a house I had built, and I was now silently, patiently turning off the lights one by one. They thought they had banished the architect, but they had only made her invisible. And an invisible enemy is the only kind to fear. The next phase required a delicate touch. The pinprick glitches had served their purpose. They had established my presence in the minds of my targets. A nagging, inexplicable ghost haunting the periphery of their success. Now it was time to move from psychological warfare to strategic sabotage. It was time to make the ghost whisper not just to Julian and Kenji, but to the board, to investors, and to the ever-watchful tech press. I needed to transform their narrative of flawless victory into a story of instability and incompetence. My alliance with Sarah, a Cassandra protocol, was my conduit. Through encrypted channels, she became my eyes and ears, feeding me information on internal morale, project timelines, and the subtle shifts in the corporate political landscape. She told me about the board's growing impatience for the IPO, Julian's increasing paranoia, and Kenji's struggle to live up to the legend of the role he had stolen. He was a brilliant coder, but he was not an architect, was a maintainer, not a visionary, and the strain was beginning to show. My first target was the bedrock of any corporation's value, its financial projections. Innovate Inc. was in its pre-IPO quiet period, a delicate dance of impressing institutional investors without violating SEC regulations. Julian was personally overseeing the financial models being prepared for a series of discrete high-stakes presentations. These models, of course, were managed and visualized through Nexus. From my ghostly perch, I watched them work. Julian, along with the CFO, would input raw data, and Nexus's powerful AI would extrapolate growth, user acquisition costs, and projected revenue streams for the next 5 years. The results were, to put it mildly, optimistic. Julian was promising. The moon and Nexus was providing the beautiful, algorithmically generated roadmap to get there. My attack was surgical. I wouldn't corrupt the raw data. That was too easily traceable. Instead, I targeted the AI's learning algorithm itself. It was a complex, multi-layered neural network that I knew better than my own reflection. I introduced a subtle, almost imperceptible bias. I wrote a small, elegant script that would attach itself to the algorithm like a remora to a shark. It was designed to do one thing: round down, not by much. A fraction of a percentage point here, a tiny dip there. It was a digital sigh, a whisper, of pessimism buried in a sea of data. The effect was not immediate. For the first few runs, the changes were negligible, well within the margin of error. But the bias was designed to compound. Each new data set it processed, each new projection it ran. The pessimistic grounding would grow, feeding on itself. The first presentation was to a consortium of venture capitalists from New York. Julian, oozing confidence, put the projections on the screen. The numbers were still fantastic, but they weren't the stratospheric figures he had rehearsed. A projected 450% growth in a key sector now showed as 415%. A predicted $1.2 billion revenue in year 3 was now a slightly less thrilling $1.1 billion. Watched Julian through the webcam of the boardroom laptop, a feed I had piggybacked onto. I saw the subtle tightening of his jaw. He was a man who had memorized every single number, and the numbers on the screen were betraying him. He tried to brush it off, speaking of conservative modeling, but the New York VCs were sharp. Their questions became more pointed. What had changed in the last week to temper the projections? It was their new market data they weren't privy to. After the meeting, I monitored the internal chatter. Julian was furious. He tore into the finance team, who swore the raw data was correct. He cornered Kenji, demanding he run a full diagnostic on the Nexus AI. Kenji spent 2 days searching for a flaw, but he was looking for a sledgehammer blow, not a microscopic virus. He was searching for my old coding style, my fingerprints. But I had evolved. My ghost code was minimalist, efficient, and completely anonymous. He found nothing. He declared the system clean, suggesting the AI was simply self-calibrating with new market data. The explanation was weak, but it was all he had. Julian, having no other choice, had to accept it. The whisper had begun. Perhaps Nexus wasn't the infallible oracle he'd promised. Next, I turned my attention to the carefully cultivated partnership between the king and his crown prince. Julian and Kenji's alliance was built on a shared crime and the spoils of victory. It was a foundation of sand, and I intended to introduce a storm. I used my access to their calendars and internal communications to orchestrate a series of unfortunate coincidences. Julian, a notorious micromanager, liked to do surprise walkarounds to keep his teams on their toes. Sarah would tip me off when he was leaving his office. Just as he'd approach the development floor, I would trigger a minor but visible system alert on Kenji's main monitor, something mundane like a server load warning, and simultaneously send Kenji an automated high-priority meeting request from a different department for that exact moment. So Julian would arrive, ready to inspect his domain, only to find his lead developer distracted by a system alert and then immediately pulled away to a meeting he couldn't miss. To Julian, it began to look like Kenji was avoiding him, or worse, that Kenji was constantly battling fires on a system that was supposed to be flawless. The masterpiece of this phase was what I came to call the email echo. I wrote a script, That would scan for emails sent between Julian and Kenji. It would then take key phrases and reinsert them into other unrelated internal communications, creating a sense of digital déjà vu and crossed wires. For instance, Julian sent Kenji a sharp, private email. The numbers for the German deal are looking soft. We need a more aggressive strategy. This is a top priority. My script then plucked the phrase looking soft and aggressive strategy. A few hours later, the head of marketing sent out a company-wide email about a new ad campaign. Buried in the middle of her email, my script would seamlessly insert a sentence that read, "Early feedback is positive, though some focus groups feel the tagline is looking soft and we may need a more aggressive strategy." Then I did the reverse. Kenji sent a technical update to his team. We need to address the latency issues in the EU West 1 server cluster before the Q3 rollout. The next day, in a financial summary Julian was reading from the CFO, a line would appear. Q3 projections are solid, though we need to be mindful of and address the latency issues in the EU West 1 server cluster. The effect was insidious. Neither man could point to a specific hacked email. The communications themselves were legitimate, but they were being subtly cross-contaminated. Julian started to believe Kenji was leaking their private conversations, airing their dirty laundry to other departments. Kenji, in turn, became baffled and paranoid. Seeing phrases from his technical reports appearing in financial documents he had no access to, started to suspect the finance department was spying on him. Mistrust began to fester. Their conversations, which I monitored via backdoored chat logs, grew shorter, more strained. The easy camaraderie was replaced by suspicion. Julian began to secretly solicit second opinions on technical matters from other senior developers. A clear vote of no confidence in Kenji. Kenji started documenting every interaction, creating his own private paper trail, the act of a man who fears he is being set up to take a fall. Their alliance was cracking, and I was the one holding the chisel. The final piece of the Whisper campaign was to take the narrative outside the walls of Innovate Inc. The tech press had been their greatest cheerleaders. It was time to give them something new to write about. I needed a journalist, someone hungry and credible. I found one in Liam Carter, K-Tech blogger for a small but respected online publication called Digital Dispatches. He had a reputation for digging deep, for not just reprinting press releases. Again, I used my Cassandra persona. Subject: the cracks in Nexus, Mr. Carter. You have praised the architecture of Innovate Inc.'s Nexus platform, but an architect knows the difference between a facade and a foundation. The foundation of Nexus is not as stable as its charismatic CEO would have you believe. Look closer. Ask about platform glitches during recent investor presentations. Ask enterprise clients about localization bugs during security demos. Ask why the lead architect really left on the eve of the launch. Don't trust the press. Release Dig, a friend of True Innovation. To prove my bona fides, I attached a small encrypted file. It contained a single piece of information: the internal IP address of the server that had momentarily flashed the wrong logo during Julian's Austin keynote. It was a piece of data no outsider could possibly have. Liam Carter was intrigued. He started sniffing around. He called his sources. He reached out to former Innovate employees. The seeds of doubt I had planted internally now had fertile ground to grow in the outside world. Sarah became an invaluable, if unwitting, source for him. Liam, following the trail, eventually contacted her asking for her off-the-record opinion on the company's culture. Sarah, armed with the knowledge I had given her, could speak truthfully of the shift in priorities from quality to speed, of the growing pressure from the top. She never mentioned me, never broke her own NDA, but she confirmed the narrative. She painted a picture of a company stretched thin, led by a CEO whose ambition might be outstripping his team's ability to deliver a stable product. Liam Carter's first article came out on a Tuesday morning. It was cautiously worded but devastating. The headline read, Nexus, Triumph or Tremor. Sources hint at instability in tech's new darling. The piece detailed the rumors of presentation glitches and demo failures. It quoted anonymous former employees who spoke of a pressure cooker environment. It didn't mention me by name. But it cast a long shadow over my abrupt departure, reframing it not as a story of my failure, but as a symptom of the company's internal turmoil. The article hit Innovate Inc. like a shockwave. The board demanded an emergency meeting. The stock, which had been trading on the private market at an all-time high, dipped for the first time. Julian was apoplectic. In a company-wide email, he dismissed the article as the baseless fabrications of a jealous competitor, but the damage was done. The whisper was now a public murmur. I watched the fallout from my command center. I saw the panic in their communications, the frantic search for a leak, phasing shadows, suspecting everyone except the one person they believed they had utterly defeated. They were trapped inside the system with my ghost, and the walls were closing in. They had built their empire on my work, and I was turning that empire into a labyrinth of my own design. Every corner they turned, they would find only their own paranoia reflected back at them. The financial ground beneath their feet was trembling. Their alliance was poisoned with distrust, and their public image was beginning to tarnish. They still held the keys to the kingdom, but they were beginning to realize the kingdom was haunted. And the ghost was just getting started. The murmur had grown into a rumble. Liam Carter's article, followed by a series of more speculative pieces from other tech blogs, had successfully chipped away at Innovate Inc.'s polished veneer. The narrative was shifting. Julian was no longer the infallible visionary. He was a CEO under pressure. Kenji was no longer the wunderkind. He was the struggling successor. The IPO, once a foregone conclusion, was now spoken of in hushed, uncertain tones. From my silent, shadowy command post, I observed the chaos I had wrought. Panic is a catalyst for mistakes, and Julian, cornered and desperate, was about to make a very big one. My ghost, Cassandra, had become an invaluable asset. Sarah fed me a constant stream of high-level intelligence. The board was getting cold feet about the IPO. The constant, low-level system hiccups, a feature I had lovingly continued to sprinkle into their daily operations, were making the C-suite nervous. A corrupted quarterly report here, a mysteriously deleted calendar for a key client meeting there. Each incident was small enough to be deniable, but the cumulative effect was one of pervasive, unshakable instability. They were living in a digital house where the faucets dripped, the lights flickered, the floorboards creaked at night, never knowing the architect was living in the walls, desperate to restore confidence and secure his golden parachute. Julian initiated a new audacious plan. If the public markets were spooked, he would go private. He entered into secret negotiations for a full acquisition by our old competitor, the monolithic Cygnus Systems. It was the very company they had accused me of selling secrets to. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Cygnus was a corporate shark tank, known for acquiring innovative companies, gutting them for their intellectual property, and discarding the rest. For Julian, it was a lifeline. The acquisition would be an all-cash deal that would make him and the other primary shareholders obscenely wealthy. Bypassing the scrutiny of an IPO, for the company itself, for the employees, for the soul of Nexus. It was a death sentence. Sarah confirmed the rumor through a fragmented document she'd glimpsed on a VP's screen. The deal was codenamed Project Atlas. The final presentation to the Cygnus executive board was in 3 weeks. This was Julian's endgame. And it would have to be mine. To dot my whisper campaign had been effective, but it was time to prepare. For a shout, it was time to build my weapon. All my previous actions, the glitches, the financial manipulations, the seeds of discord, were merely preparatory bombardments. Now, I needed to forge the instrument of their final public annihilation. I would build a Trojan horse. It would be the most complex, most elegant piece of code I had ever written. It would not be a virus designed to destroy. Destruction was beneath me. My revenge was about truth. My Trojan horse would be an agent of revelation. Its purpose was to lie dormant and undetectable within the core of Nexus, and then, at my command, to activate and expose the one thing they had fought so hard to bury, the unalterable truth of my innocence and their guilt. For 2 weeks, I barely slept. My apartment became a cocoon of glowing screens and discarded coffee cups. The code was my entire world. I built the horse in layers, like a digital Matryoshka doll. The outer layer was a cloaking mechanism designed to mimic benign system processes, making it invisible to any diagnostic Kenji might run. He was good, but he was looking for threats. He understood brute force attacks, malware, data breaches. He would never think to look for a ghost that could write code in the pristine, elegant style of the system's original architect. I was hiding in plain sight, using my own past genius as camouflage. The second layer was the payload delivery system. It was designed to hijack Nexus's primary presentation interface, the very one Julian would be using to sell his company to Cygnus. It wouldn't crash the presentation. It would become the presentation. The heart of the horse, the payload itself, was a meticulously curated archive of truth. I spent days deep within the system's oldest, most secure archives, places no one had looked in years. Using the backdoor's privileged access, I could unearth the raw, untempered server logs from the week of my termination. These logs, buried under layers of falsified data, were the digital bedrock of my innocence. They showed my actual activity, my code commits, my emails, all normal, productive work. Then I located the logs that documented the creation of the fabricated evidence. Because they had used the backdoor to plant it, they had left faint, almost untraceable footprints. To a normal system administrator, they were meaningless anomalies. But to the system's architect, they were a signed confession. I could see the commands Kenji had executed, the data packets he had created and routed. He had been clumsy in his haste, confident no one would ever look this deep. I found the original unaltered source code he had packaged, and I found the digital trail, leading directly to Julian's executive account, which had authorized the final transfer to the offshore server. They hadn't just framed me. They had left the murder weapon wiped of their fingerprints, but still warm, hidden under the floorboards. I packaged it all into a single, encrypted file. The original server logs, the logs of the fabricated evidence. Their chat logs from that week, which I had exhumed from a supposedly deleted cache discussing their contingency plan for me. And the records of the Cayman Islands bank account, which I had traced back to a shell corporation owned by Julian's. Brother-in-law. The final piece of the Trojan horse was its trigger. I couldn't risk activating it manually in real time. The slightest network lag or countermeasure could disrupt it. It needed to be automated, precise, and dramatic. I synced the activation sequence to a specific data point in Julian's presentation. I knew he was a creature of habit and ego. His presentations always followed a pattern. He would build to a crescendo, a final, triumphant slide revealing the peak acquisition number or growth projection. That would be his moment of ultimate victory. And that would be my trigger. I programmed the horse to activate the instant the specific string of text, final enterprise valuation, appeared on the master display, with the weapon built and armed. The hardest part was getting it into position. I couldn't just upload a massive encrypted file to the Nexus core. It would trigger alarms. I had to smuggle it in, piece by piece. Over the course of 4 nights, during periods of minimal system traffic, I broke the Trojan horse down into thousands of tiny, harmless-looking data packets. I disguised them as routine language library updates, performance metric logs, and user avatar icon refreshes. Each packet was a single meaningless brick. I sent them to disparate, forgotten corners of the server farm. Then, once all the bricks were in place, I sent a single final command, a self-assembly script that acted like a master mason. Silently, deep within the machine, the thousands of scattered bricks found each other and began to build the horse. It was the most nerve-wracking 72 hours of my life. I monitored the system with a hawk's intensity, watching for any sign of detection. Kenji, overworked and paranoid, was running diagnostics almost hourly. I saw his queries flash past my monitoring screen, his digital presence sniffing around the edges of my work. Once his diagnostic script came so close to one of my hidden data packets that my heart leaped into my throat. But my camouflage held. My code was a perfect chameleon, blending seamlessly into the background noise of the billion-dollar machine. On the final night, the assembly completed. The Trojan horse was nested, dormant and invisible, directly within the operating system's core. It was ready now. All I could do was wait. The 3 weeks leading up to the Cygnus presentation were an exercise in restraint. My instinct was to keep poking, to keep reminding them I was there. But I couldn't risk it. Any new anomaly might trigger a deeper, more forensic system analysis that could uncover my weapon. I had to let them believe the ghost had departed, that the worst was over. I had to give them a taste of calm before the storm. During this time, the human cost of my crusade and their betrayal became clearer. Sarah told me of widespread anxiety within the company. Layoffs were rumored to be imminent post-acquisition. The vibrant creative culture I had helped build was being replaced by fear. The employees, my former colleagues and friends, were just pawns in Julian's game. This realization solidified my resolve. My revenge was not just for me anymore. It was for them. It was for the dream of Innovate Inc. that Julian had corrupted and was now preparing to sell for scrap. The night before the presentation D-Day, as I called it, I felt a strange sense of calm. Everything that could be done was done. My digital army was in position, awaiting the signal. I had gambled everything on this single audacious act. If it failed, they would find me. My ghost would be exorcised, and Aurelia Vance would likely spend the rest of her life in a real prison, not just a metaphorical one. But if it worked, it would be a reckoning of biblical proportions. I made one final personal preparation. I drafted a press release from Cassandra. It was a full confession and explanation of everything I had done. From the first glitch to the Trojan horse, it detailed Julian and Kenji's conspiracy, providing a clear, concise guide to the evidence my horse would reveal. I timed it to be sent to Liam Carter and a dozen other major news outlets the second my trigger was activated. I would not let them control the narrative. Not for a single second. As the sun rose on the day of the presentation, I sat before my monitors, a single cup of black coffee, my only companion. I had a direct hidden feed to the boardroom's audio and video. I could see the polished table, the Cygnus Systems logo on the welcome screen, the expectant faces of their executives. I was the all-seeing eye, the digital god holding the lightning bolt. Julian walked in, flanked by Kenji and the CFO. He looked confident, rested, reborn. He believed he had weathered the storm and was moments away from the safety of the harbor. He smiled, shook hands, his charisma cranked to its maximum setting. He had no idea he was a dead man walking. He had no idea that his executioner was. Watching him from 1,000 miles away, her finger resting on the digital trigger, ready to deliver not death, but truth. And in the world Julian had built, truth was the most lethal weapon of all. The air in the Innovate Inc. boardroom crackled with the energy of a billion-dollar deal. I watched through my hidden video feed as Julian Croft, the master showman, took his position at the head of the gleaming mahogany table. He was in his element, a predator who had cornered the most lucrative prey of his career. The executives from Cygnus Systems, led by their notoriously ruthless CEO. A woman named Evelyn Reed watched him with cool, appraising eyes. They were sharks smelling blood, ready to close the deal that would see them swallow Innovate Inc. whole. Kenji sat to Julian's right, looking pale and tense. A young man who had sold his soul for a seat at a table that was about to be flipped over. My heart hammered a steady, percussive rhythm against my ribs. My apartment, my war room, was dark except for the glow of 6 monitors displaying a cascade of data streams, video feeds, and the silent waiting interface of my Trojan horse control program. A single line of text blinked on the main screen. Payload armed, awaiting trigger. For months, my world had been a silent digital battlefield. Now the final confrontation was about to begin in the physical world. And I was its invisible puppet master. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice smooth as polished granite. "Welcome. What we're here to discuss today is not merely an acquisition. It is the fusion of 2 great destinies. It's the power and market reach of Cygnus, combined with the unparalleled innovation of Nexus, which was magnificent. I had to give him that. He spun a tale of vision and triumph, painting a picture of a flawless technological marvel that had conquered the world. He walked them through the platform, showcasing its features, my features. He presented the manipulated growth charts, the sanitized user feedback, the rosy financial projections that my subtle sabotage had previously undermined, but which he had now corrected for this final, glorious performance. He was selling a fantasy, and the buyers eager for the prize were lapping it up with each slide he presented. A corresponding check-in flashed on my monitor. Systems nominal. Horse undetected. Kenji ran a quick furtive diagnostic in the background eye. Saw the query flash through the server logs, a nervous tic he had developed over the past few months. The diagnostic reported a clean bill of health. So my horse remained invisible, a phantom sleeping in the heart of the machine. But the true value, Julian continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, is not just where we are, but where we are going. Our AI-driven predictive modeling allows us to project our future with unprecedented accuracy. This was the prelude, the build-up to the grand finale. My fingers hovered over my keyboard, a reflexive tension gripping me. I took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying my nerves. Patience. Let him walk to the edge of the cliff himself. "Let me show you the culmination of our work," he said, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. He clicked the remote in his hand. A new slide began to materialize on the massive 8K screen that dominated the boardroom wall. The final independently audited 5-year projection. Our final enterprise valuation. That was it. That was the trigger. The phrase final enterprise valuation was the key. The instant the last letter rendered on that screen, my Trojan horse awoke. For a single beautiful second, the slide with Julian's glorious multi-billion-dollar number appeared. I saw the flash of victory in his eyes, the satisfied smile. And then it vanished. The screen did not go black, did not show an error message. It simply changed. The sleek, corporate branding of the Nexus interface dissolved, replaced by the stark, raw, black and green command line interface of a root-level terminal. For the tech-savvy executives in the room, it was the equivalent of a curtain being pulled back to reveal the grimy, mechanical underbelly of the stage. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Julian froze, his smile locked in a rictus of confusion. "Kenji, what the hell is that?" he hissed, his voice a raw whisper caught on the boardroom's sensitive microphones. Kenji's face was a mask of pure terror. He frantically typed on his laptop, but it was useless. He was a user with admin privileges. I was the system's ghost. He was locked out. Then, on the screen, text began to appear. It typed itself out, line by line with cold, robotic precision. It was not a glitch. It was a broadcast initiating system integrity audit. Revelation protocol, accessing, archive, server. LOGs, week 34, untampered. A split screen appeared. On the left, a scrolling wall of text. My actual user logs from the week I was fired. My code commits my emails to my team, my project notes, the mundane, truthful record of my work. On the right, another set of logs began to scroll. The fabricated evidence trail, the fake data packets, the forged emails, the rerouted IP addresses. Side by side. The truth and the lie were laid bare for all to see, correlating fabrication with user activity. User K. Tanaka. Authorization JCROFT. Kenji made a small wah, strangled sound like a dying animal. He looked as if he was about to be physically sick. The Cygnus executives were leaning forward. Their expressions transformed from corporate boredom to rapt, predatory attention. Evelyn Reed's eyes were narrowed, fixed on the screen. Julian's face had gone from confused to ashen. Shut it down. He snarled at Kenji. Shut the whole system down now. I can't, Kenji stammered, his fingers rattling uselessly. On his keyboard, it's not responding. I'm locked out. Screen changed again, displaying exhumed communication logs. Project backdoor. The chat logs appeared. It's the damning conversations between Julian and Kenji. Julian is the contingency. Plan ready? Kenji, the package is built. Will look like she sold the code herself. Julian, no loose ends. Her legacy has to become ours. Kenji, she'll never see it coming. A wave of murmurs swept through the Cygnus team. Evelyn Reed slowly sat back in. Her chair, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. She wasn't watching the screen anymore. She was watching Julian. The final nail in the coffin appeared on the screen, tracing financial disbursement. Project backdoor. Source, Innovate Inc. Offshore ops account. Destination, Cayman. Islands ACCT number 4,815,162,342 account holder, Marcus Thorne brother-in-law to JCROFT. It was over. Checkmate. In that moment of stunned, absolute silence, I hit the final key on my keyboard. The one that sent my Cassandra press release to Liam Carter and every major media outlet on my list. The story, with a link to a public site where I was now streaming the boardroom screen, was on its way. The world would know what happened here, right as it was happening. Julian Croft, the silver-tongued visionary, stood frozen for a moment. His empire of lies crumbling into digital dust before his very eyes. Then his head snapped towards Kenji. The look on his face was no longer one of partnership, but of pure, murderous rage. He saw his betrayer, the weak link, the one who had gotten them caught. You, he roared, his voice cracking. You were supposed to be clean. I thought I was, Kenji whimpered, shrinking back in his chair. Evelyn Reed, the CEO of Cygnus, stood up. Her voice was calm, cutting through the chaos like a razor. Gentlemen, she said, the word dripping with contempt, thank you for the most illuminating presentation I have ever witnessed. It seems the primary asset of Innovate Inc. is not its technology, but its remarkable talent for fraud. She turned to her team. We're leaving. She didn't even look at Julian as she walked out. Her team followed, some of them openly smirking. The deal wasn't just dead, it was a smoking crater. The boardroom door clicked shut, leaving Julian and Kenji in the ruins. Screen behind them still displayed their crimes for the empty room to see. Julian's carefully constructed world had been dismantled in less than 5 minutes by the woman he thought he had erased. I leaned back in my chair, my apartment silent save for the hum of my own servers. I watched Julian sink into his chair, a broken man. I watched Kenji stare into the abyss of his future. I felt no elation, no thrill of victory. Just a quiet, profound sense of justice delivered, a balance restored. My rage had burned away, leaving behind a cold, clean calm. I had not destroyed them with lies, but with the truth, their own truth. I closed the video feed. I shut down the Trojan horse, letting the screen in the boardroom finally go black. My work was done. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Liam Carter's story, citing the irrefutable evidence from Cassandra, broke the internet. Department of Justice, spurred by a dozen calls from Cygnus Systems' legal team, launched a full-scale investigation. Federal agents were at Innovate Inc.'s headquarters by sunset. Julian and Kenji were both fired. Their pictures plastered across every news site, symbols of corporate greed and hubris. They were subsequently indicted on charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy. Innovate Inc., as a corporate entity, was finished. Its stock became worthless overnight. But Nexus, my creation, was saved. In the ensuing bankruptcy, a consortium of ethical investors guided by Sarah Jenkins managed to acquire the Nexus IP. They rebuilt the company from the ground up, rebranding it and installing a new board and a new CEO. Sarah, one of her first acts was to issue a public formal apology to me and to offer me a consulting role, a chance to guide the future of my creation. I politely declined. My time in that world was over. I let the Cassandra persona fade away. Her purpose served. I took a portion of the considerable settlement Innovate's new board offered me as restitution and used it to start my own small company. A company built not on aggressive timelines and dazzling sales pitches, but on ethical design, transparency, and a genuine desire to build good things. My name, Aurelia Vance, was cleared. More than cleared. It became a legend in the tech world. The woman who was framed by her own creation and then used it to enact the most elegant, surgical corporate revenge in Silicon Valley history. I never spoke of it publicly. I never gave an interview. I let the evidence and the legend of Cassandra speak for itself. Sometimes, when I'm working late in my new, quiet office, I think of that hum. The symphony of the servers at Innovate Inc. It's a sound I will never forget. For a time, it was the sound of my dream. Then, it became the sound of my betrayal. But in the end, I conducted it one last time, turning it into a funeral dirge for the men who had wronged me. And now, in the silence that follows, I can finally hear the sound of my own future being built.